When you think about it, I'm here to make your chess experience fun and amazing. By spicing up things, showing you new tricks and traps that you can employ in your main opening repertoires. Which is why you have all the reasons to subscribe to this channel if you haven't already, and be sure to hit the like button and leave your comment to appreciate my little efforts. Guys, today's lesson is going to be unique. I'm going to show you how to crush d4 players with the move pawn to a6 in 5 different openings or defenses that you probably know. So without wasting much of your time, let's get started. Coming straight from my elbow library is opening number 1, the delayed Caro-Kann version. So white starts with d4, and here you play pawn to a6 on the first move. Take a look at the stats in the Masters database. For those of you who are not familiar, this is what masters play in OTB tournament games. You can see with your own eyeballs, how possible is it that this one pawn move destroys white's d4 like this? This is very weird. It's something that you don't usually see. This is the secret that I'm giving you guys. Pawn to a6 is kind of a prophylactic move, also aimed at building your position, but the main idea is to force white to go back to e4, and this is what most people do in over-the-board games. When you play pawn to a6, they will go back to e4. You can see with your own eyeballs right above your nose, so I'm not making these things up. So first of all, let's begin with what to do against pawn to e4. So since the first opening on our list of 5 is the delayed Caro-Kann version, we are going to start with c6. The top played move by white is knight to f3. Now you go pawn to d5. This is the same thing that you do in the Caro-Kann, except with this early knight. Now you can see the top played move again is pawn to e5, after which you go bishop f5. Let's say they play bishop d3. The whole purpose is to trade off our light squared bishop and start putting all our pawns on light squares. If you want to know more about these kinds of strategies, you can get my Caro-Kann course at www.kasperchess.com. Anyways, the top played move is castle shot by white, you can see. And now there are many ways of killing a rat, you guys. Avoid memorizing moves. You can play knight e7 if you want, intending to put your knight on f5. That's okay. Or you can go right away pawn to c5. For example, knight e7. If let's say white plays bishop g5, stopping you from going knight f5, you can simply go pawn to h6. If bishop h4, again there are many ways of killing a rat. You can go queen c7 if you want and play knight f5 next, or probably just go pawn to g5. You have no weaknesses. If bishop g3, you go knight f5. Your knight on f5 is a killer. And there's this common error where white wants to do a little pawn break on the center, pawn to c4. You can see with your own eyes once again, this is considered to be a blunder in this particular line. Why? Because of pawn to h5. We just want to trap white's dark squared bishop. Let's say white plays h3. You can just go pawn to g4. You just want to open up the king side first. Now attacking the knight. If knight h2, you go queen g5. See where all your attack is going. I mean, c takes d5, c takes d5, knight c3, knight c6. Anytime you want to, you can castle long. If you think pawn to f4 does something for white, well, that is a terrible blunder because of g takes with ampersand, and if rook takes, now you go knight c takes, that free pawn. Anyways, this was just one of the possibilities in which the game can go if you want to play knight e7 instead of pawn to c5 on move 7. So again, after white castles short, remember you can go pawn to c5 if you want, which I highly recommend. The thing in the Caro-Kann defense is that we no longer have the bad French bishop on c8. So after trading that off, we can now start playing the typical French defense, beginning with pawn to c5. If pawn to c3, the top played move, now you go knight c6, you have all these moves. For example, bishop e3. Whenever I see things start bulking up on the center, I just simplify the game to keep it simple. Now I go knight e7 with the same idea of putting my knight on f5. By the way, this may also force white to overextend his pawn, which is not good. So if knight c3, I still go knight f5, I'll play bishop e7 next and castle short. Is this the d4 opening that you started with? Anyways, so this is just one of the ways in which you can play the delayed Caro-Kann version using my elbow ways with your own eyeballs. Let's move on to the next opening. Opening number 2, coming straight from my elbow library, is the delayed Grunfeld defense version, starting with the move pawn to d4 by white. Now you go pawn to s6 once again. Now this time let's look at the top played move in the Lichess database, which can be played by anyone. Pawn to c4. Of course, there are so many things that you can do. For example, knight to f6, stopping the immediate pawn to e4 by white. And again, you can see knight c3 is by far the top played move in both the Lichess and the Masters database. You can see with your own eyeballs. If they play this, this is when you can play pawn to d5 right away. Give this to a master. They will always take on d5 at least 90% of the times. So you can just take back. After pawn to e4, you take that knight. This is kind of the Grunfeld, guys. Experts know what I'm talking about. In the Grunfeld, we deliberately give white the whole center, which we break immediately before castling short with the move pawn to c5. In the typical Grunfeld, we first of all play pawn to g6 and bishop g7 before playing this move pawn to c5. But anyways, this is okay. Speaking of my elbow openings, if d takes c5, which is not good, you don't even have to exchange queens. I mean, you have queen f5 or even better, queen c7, posing a direct threat on this pawn. If they go bishop e3 defending it, you play pawn to e6. Now double attacking this pawn. If they go queen a4 check, you always have bishop d7. If they go queen b4, we have knight c6. Let's say queen b6, rook c8. All these are just possibilities, you guys. At the end of the day, we are going to get back our pawn, and there's nothing that white can do about it. Anyways, so after giving white the whole center, and then we go pawn to c5, white doesn't really have to take on c5. The top played move is knight to f3. Bishop g4 looks good, but it's just a 1-0 move, you guys. The problem with bishop g4, especially if you haven't castled short or if white's pawn is already on e4, is that white may play queen b3 and threaten to win your pawn on b7. So you don't want this to happen. You can just go pawn to e6. I mean, you haven't yet castled short and the center is locked. Anyways, pawn to e6. Let's say bishop d3. Again, you are always at liberty of simplifying the game like this. Bishop d2 blocking the check. Bishop takes, queen takes. Castle short, then you go knight c6. The whole idea is just to simplify the game, oversimplifying the game. Now we want to take the d4 pawn. Let's say if bishop c2, you go b5. If d5, you don't even have to take. You can simply go knight a5, intending to plant your knight on c4. These are the kinds of moves that separate beginners from experts. Advanced players don't just take anyhow. They play with a view of building their position. If rook fd1, knight c4 here comes, let's say queen d4. Anyways, the game may continue from here. It's up to you to come up with a better plan. Let the best player win. So that was all about the delayed Grunfeld defense version. Before I move on, let me show you the knight to f3 line. I mean, after d4, s6, pawn to c4, knight to f6, knight c3 and d5. If white plays any highlighted move in red, your response will always be to take on c4. For example, if they play the top played move in the Lichess database, knight to f3, you just go ahead and take. If they don't stop you from going pawn to b5 and solidify your pawns, you can do that. For example, if pawn to e4, you can go pawn to b5 and solidify your queenside pawns for good. If they play pawn to a4, stopping b5, you can just go knight c6. Let's say pawn to e4. I mean, you can play pawn to e6 and continue developing normally. Even bishop g4 here makes a lot of sense. Why? Because this time white doesn't have queen b3 to attack our b7 pawn immediately. Anyways, opening number 3, the delayed Alekhine defense version coming straight from my eyeballs library. Let's say pawn to d4. Again, you go pawn to a6. So white is forced to go back to e4. Remember, our first opening was the Caro-Kann defense. But hey, you can also play in the style of the Alekhine's defense. Going back to the Lichess database, you will see that pawn to e5 is by far the top played move. After which you can go knight d5. Same stuff, pawn to c4. You go knight b6. By the way, never should you be afraid of pawn to c5 because that allows your knight to sit on a juicy outpost. There is no pawn that will ever attack your knight, which is a very good outpost for your knight. If bishop c4, just go pawn to e6, defending your knight and also stopping bishop g5. If bishop takes, you can take, that's okay, you have no weaknesses. Let's say knight to f3. This is when you can break this pawn structure on the center. Let's say cd, cd. It doesn't matter if they take or not. You are both going to remain with isolated pawns on the center of the board. If castle short by white, you go bishop e7. Let's say knight c3 or whatever. attacking your pawn on d5. You always have bishop e6, by the way. If queen b3, b5. This looks like a free pawn, but hey, that's a big blunder because of d takes e5. The knight is pinned to the queen, and there's nothing that white can do to save the knight without losing the queen. So again, you can see this 100% win rate for black players. These things do happen, ladies and gentlemen, and this is the secret that I'm giving you. That's why I deserve your like, and the bigger the audience I have, the bigger the motivation and the willingness to produce high quality content. Anyways, let's look at something else that can happen in the Alekhine version. So back on move 4, it's not always that white will play pawn to c5, allowing you to have a great outpost on d4. Sometimes white can play knight to c3, which happens to be the top played move according to the Lichess database. Because of these overextended pawns, we are at liberty of going pawn to d6. If pawn to a4, another pawn extension, you can simplify the game as follows. You go knight c6, double attacking the d4 pawn. This is what we do in the Alekhine's defense. They'll play knight f3. Now you go bishop g4. Can you see the moments when we are playing this bishop g4 pin? Yep, only when white doesn't have queen b3 to attack our b7 pawn. So this is very important to master, you guys. If bishop e3, defending the d4 pawn, you go pawn to e6. And when you look at this position carefully, you will see that you can even win a free pawn with knight takes c4. Anyways, again, there's a lot of things that we can talk about, but this is not a video about the delayed Alekhine defense version alone. We still have 2 more openings to cover. So opening number 4, the delayed Benoni defense version, also coming straight from my elbow library, where white starts with d4 and pawn to a6. Again, it doesn't matter if white plays pawn to c4. For example, c4, you can still go c5, and after pawn to d5, this is when you go pawn to e4. This is what we call the Benoni. By the way, white can't play pawn to d6 because we have queen b6. Guys, the whole purpose of this opening is to go back to our e4 opening lines. For example, the top played move here is pawn to e4 by white. Now this is when you go pawn to d6 and you start developing your moves. As highlighted, your queen's knight will mostly sit on the king side. You have 2 knights like this. I like this delayed Benoni version because of this pawn on s6. White doesn't have knight b5 in the near future to harass my d6 pawn. So that's just one of the ways in which the Benoni can go. But let's say if white goes back to e4, well, you can still go pawn to c5, by the way. If d5, once again, you have pawn to e5. If de, you take back with your f pawn. Let's say if pawn to c4, the top played move, once again, you just play pawn to d6. Again, you are back to the same thing that we talked about. Knight c3 is the top played move. Then you go bishop e7. Let's say bishop d3. Knight d7 is very important. You know, before castling short, you rush to relocate your knight to the king side. Anyways, if you want to know more about the real Benoni defense, you can again head to my website www.casperchess.com and check out my Benoni defense course, suitable for beginners and intermediate level players. Anyways, opening number 5 is the stomach defense. Oh no, I was just kidding. You guys are so boring today. I'm trying by all means to get your attention. Our last opening from my elbow library is the delayed Scandinavian version, where white starts with d4, then you go pawn to s6, once again, then e4, d5. How is this going to turn into the Scandinavian defense? Well, it is when white decides to take on d5, then you take back with your queen. Let me explain. It's like white started with pawn to e4, then you played d5, and then pawn takes, queen takes. Except this time, white's pawn is already on d4. So if knight c3 comes, you can play queen d6 if you want. That's okay. But what I like doing is just queen d8. I mean, you have black pieces and you have limited options. So sometimes you just need to answer to white's threats. So let's say knight f3 by white. You can go knight f6 as if there is NGO. I mean, nothing going on. If bishop c4 by white, the top played move, you can play pawn to h6 or pawn to e6 if you want, but you have a great possibility of developing your queenside pawn with the tempo. You know, this comes with an attack on white's bishop. If bishop b3, again you can play pawn to e6, bishop e7, g6 or pawn to h6. You don't have to memorize anything, but the most appealing move to me is pawn to c5. Why? it has a direct threat of trapping white's light squared bishop. If they take, that's what I want, because I wanted to develop my dark squared bishop with tempo. But first of all, I should exchange queens and then play pawn to e6. If they try to hold on to it, I want to play knight bd7, but I'm afraid because of pawn to c6 by white, so I should first of all go bishop b7, stopping pawn to c6, so that if whatever white is going to play, let's say knight c3 or even castle shot, I'll go knight bd7 and on the next move win this poor pawn on c5. On top of that, I have a great position with well advanced pawns on the queen side. Guys, these are great ways of taking d4 players out of their prep. I guess this is enough for you guys, and don't forget to subscribe if these things make sense to you, and you can check out the rest of the videos on my channel. You guys, I have over 200 amazing videos that you can like, great videos. I also learn from them because sometimes I don't know these things. I also just do my research, ask any content creator out there. Sometimes we just learn these things together with you guys and for the sake of you guys. Anyways, until next time, bye bye.